Today, we're going to try and unravel one of the most tangled and heated debates in American life, gun control. But we're going to tackle it from a different angle. We're going to explore the history of just a single, incredibly powerful sentence. We'll trace how its meaning has been fought over for centuries and how that fight has shaped, well, pretty much everything we see today. So let's start with the words themselves.
Here they are, these 28 words. For over 200 years, every single part of this sentence, every phrase, every comma, has been picked apart and debated. But really, the whole massive argument boils down to one fundamental question. Is the whole point of this to make sure states can have militias for their collective defense? Or is it about your personal right, an individual's right to own a gun for your own protection? For most of American history, the answer seemed to point overwhelmingly in just one direction.
Yeah, for the first century and a half of the country's existence, the legal world was focused almost entirely on that first part, a well-regulated militia. And what that actually meant back then? Well, it was pretty much the exact opposite of the sort of unregulated free-for-all some people imagine today.
Back in the founding era, owning a gun wasn't just a right, it was often a state-mandated duty. Just look at this example from colonial Massachusetts. Citizens were required to own very specific, very regulated equipment so they could serve in the collective defense. If you didn't have it, you could be fined. This whole idea was about your service to the state, not really about the modern idea of personal freedom.
And for over 100 years, the courts totally agreed. From the Supreme Court saying states could control private military groups in Presser v. Illinois, to the first big federal gun regulations with the National Firearms Act, the trend was crystal clear. It all came to a head in 1939 with United States v. Miller, where the Supreme Court basically said the Second Amendment only protects weapons that are suitable for militia service. And for nearly 70 years, that was it. That was the law of the land. But that all changed in 2008.
And that brings us to the landmark case of District of Columbia v. Heller. This was the moment everything, and I mean everything, changed. It all started with a security guard named Dick Heller. He challenged the strict handgun ban in Washington, D.C., and when his case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, it completely redrew the map for the Second Amendment in the modern age.
The court was split right down the middle, 5-4. The majority, led by Justice Scalia, argued that the phrase right of the people meant a personal right to self-defense, completely separate from serving in a militia. But the dissent pushed back hard, saying, whoa, hold on, that well-regulated militia part is the whole reason the amendment exists. It's not just some throwaway intro.
So for the very first time in American history, the Supreme Court officially said that an individual has a right to own a gun for self-defense in their home. But, and this is a really critical point, the court also said this right was not unlimited. And that little phrase left the door wide open for future regulations, which created the new, incredibly complex legal world we're in now.
So after Heller, the big question became, okay, how do you balance this brand new interpretation of an individual right with public safety? The struggle to figure that out has been made even harder by all these modern problems with data and privacy, a failure that was tragically illustrated by what happened at Virginia Tech.
The Virginia Tech tragedy just laid bare a fatal gap in the system. The shooter had actually been court-ordered to get mental health treatment. But that crucial piece of information, it was never reported to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, which is the federal database that's supposed to stop prohibited people from buying guns. Because the data wasn't in the system, he passed the background check and bought his guns legally. And this wasn't just some one-off fluke.
This data from just before the tragedy in 2005 really shows why. Take a look at the reasons for NICS denials. You see that tiny little sliver right there, less than 2%? That represents denials for mental health reasons. It wasn't that the issue was rare. The problem was that the critical data just wasn't making it into the system. And the reasons for that? Well, they're incredibly complex.
You have this tangled web of federal and state laws that just creates confusion. Health privacy laws like HIPAA and student privacy laws like FERPA are of course designed to protect our personal information, but they can also get in the way of sharing critical mental health records with law enforcement. It's this complex history and these modern failures that have led us straight to the polarized political battlefield we all see today.
Today, the arguments we hear are often boiled down into two fundamentally opposing worldviews, and each side is drawing totally different lessons from the exact same history and the exact same tragedies.
So from one perspective, like the one from commentator Wayne Allen Root, the answer to gun violence is actually a more armed citizenry. The idea here is that gun laws only end up disarming the people who follow them, leaving good, law-abiding people defenseless. So the solution is to make sure those good people can protect themselves.
But then you have the complete opposite perspective, argued here by columnist E.J. Dionne Jr. This view says that all the militarized anti-government rhetoric has blocked common-sense gun regulations that could have saved lives by, keeping weapons out of the wrong hands in the first place.
So, we're left with this question. The meaning of these words has journeyed from a regulated duty for a state militia all the way to a landmark personal right. And now we're facing all these complex realities of data and privacy in a world the founders could have never imagined. The journey of those 28 words is still going, leaving all of us to wonder, how does a nation balance a right that was forged in the 18th century with the very real dangers of the 21st? That, right there, remains the great American puzzle.